My name is Matt Urbanski. I'm from Rowan University, and this is the History of Camden class, and we're here to interview Ari Rosenberg.
My name is Robert Regler. I'm also from Rowan University, taking History of Camden, and I'm also interviewing Ari Rosenberg.
Okay, so before discussing your role as an urban farmer at CFET, we want to ask some questions about your earliest experiences with farming. Like, how did you become interested in farming?
I first became interested in farming when I was in high school. A mentor wrote me a letter my senior year, and she was on a farm in Oregon. And in the letter, she was basically, she was sharing her experience, but also encouraging me to sort of look into farming, and she thought that I would really enjoy it. I thought she was crazy, and I had no interest whatsoever in farming, but I was like, well, she's never led me down the wrong path yet, so maybe there's something there. So my first summer after high school, I went and worked on a farm in Northern Virginia. And then from there, I just fell in love pretty immediately and have been farming since then.
Okay, what were your experiences in India and Nepal like? And how did your experience influence you to get involved in food security work?
So I was in Nepal and India in 2004 and 2005 for a little over a year. And while I was there, I lived in different rural villages with families and sort of helped work on their plots. They wouldn't really call them farms probably, but their family plots. And helped plant rice, helped prune tomatoes, help cut grass for the cow. And I think for me, it was a really transformative experience for a couple of reasons. One, seeing how communities work together to sort of ensure that everyone had access to food was pretty impressive. For the rice harvest, all the women in the village would get together and help each other with their plots. So one day they would do one family's plot, the next day a different family's plot. And instead of trading money, they were just trading time. And I thought that was a really great model for community building. The second thing that was really amazing was just how affordable and accessible fresh produce was in India and Nepal. You could get a kilo of mangoes for less than a US dollar. And that was really shocking to me coming from the US, where it's not easy to get fresh produce. Even, mangoes are local in India, they're not local here, but even local produce is not cheap here, not affordable. And so being there made me think a lot about the farming I had done and who had access to the foods I'd been growing and the access to the farms that I'd been working on. And, most of the farms I'd worked on before going to India and Nepal sold to high market restaurants or sold at farmers markets that targeted middle income families and upper income families. And it wasn't accessible to lower income families. And so that sort of made me think about how I could work towards providing more access to fresh fruits and vegetables in the United States to people who had less resources.
Okay. It seemed that much of your past work was done in Maine, so what influenced you to come work in Camden?
Yeah. So I lived in Maine for a long time, for 9.5 years. That's where I went to school. And the move to Philadelphia was just personal, and then the job in Camden, I'd been looking, since living in Philly, I'd been looking for an urban farming position that was full-time and had benefits that, that I could live off of. And what attracted me specifically to Camden was its similarity to the community I worked in Maine. Lewiston is also has sort of this negative reputation, a negative reputation that's more pervasive than reality. And I feel like Camden has the same thing, but even a worse reputation, sort of on steroids, and it's the underdog, and Lewiston was the underdog. And so I felt, very sort of connected to that story, the story of a community that has this very negative reputation. The media portrays it poorly. People who are from there are sort of embarrassed to say they're from there. And simultaneously, the reality is that it's a pretty amazing place to be. There's a lot of really positive things happening. Some people that live here think it's like the greatest place on earth. And like that dichotomy is something that I find very attractive. And I think it's really important to uplift people and places that are often like, looked down upon.
Okay, what were your perceptions of Camden before moving here and when you first arrived at CFET?
Before moving here, I didn't really know much about Camden. I'd heard just sort of the same rumors that people hear about violence and crime, but I wouldn't say I knew anything. Like that's not knowledge. That's just like rumors. When I first was offered the position in Camden, I remember, telling various people in my life about it, and some people would be like, "What? Like you're going to work in Camden? Like good luck," or "I hope you get some mace," or like little comments like that for me were just like very triggering and upsetting, because like, well, can't you just be happy for me? Like I think this is a good thing. But I haven't, even when I first started working in Camden, I've never been in a situation here where I felt unsafe or where I felt like out of place. And so I think when I first started working at CFET, I was just like, I don't know what the right word is, but I just felt great about the community response to me being here. And like this neighborhood was very welcoming to me. And people would invite me over for like tea or for lunch. And like really they were trying to get to know me, not just, as someone who works here, but as a person, as a human. And so that was very welcoming and just made me even more confused about people's responses about, being here. I'm like, where is this coming from? Like, that's not my experience at all.
Cool. How have your previous experiences with farming and living in other parts of the world influenced or shaped your work at CFET?
Well, definitely, the longer you farm or grow food, the more you learn about different techniques and how to do that more efficiently and how to be more productive in doing that. So I think that will always affect, the years of experience will continue to affect my work. One thing I've really worked on here is trying to make the limited growing space as productive as possible. And, one of my goals this year was to grow more produce than we grew last year. So last year we grew around 2,300 pounds of food. And so my goal this year was to grow 2,500, and we surpassed that goal. And part of that was like implementing techniques that I knew that were like space savers, and changing some of the produce that we were growing to be, more efficient and fit with the climate better. So that's definitely impacted my work. I also think, growing culturally appropriate food is important to me. And in this community, there's a large Vietnamese population, there's a large Puerto Rican population. So growing produce that I think, comes from those cultures and they use, culinarily, I think is important. It's something that our youth talk a lot about, like the different eating habits they have. So some of our youth, have Puerto Rican, or their parents came from Puerto Rico, or grandparents, some of them were even born in Puerto Rico. So they talk about their food versus like the Black youth that I work with have very different culinary traditions. And so we try to grow food that meet those different traditions. What was the second part of your question? How your previous experiences with farming and living in other parts of the world influenced or shaped your work at CFET? So I think those things, just like taking into account culture and not just like growing as much food as you can, but sort of balancing those things.
Okay, what is the primary role or goal of an urban farmer and CFET?
Well, those are two different things. I don't know what CFET's primary goal is. So I guess I can talk about what my primary goal being here is. I think for me, the gardens have three purposes. The first purpose is to provide access to fruits and vegetables to the community. And I think that's particularly important in this neighborhood because there's no grocery stores. There's 4 corner stores and a liquor store. There's very limited access to fruits and vegetables. So, growing 2,500 pounds of food that then can be distributed here, I think that's really important. The second is that it's an outdoor classroom. It provides an education space to teach people of all ages, really, about growing food and having connection to the land. At CFET, we really focus on kids and teenagers, and we have an employment, a job employment program for teens where they get paid to work in our gardens. And while they're getting paid to work in the gardens, they also learn about leadership development, job training. It's a skill builder that will help them like throughout life, not just if they end up farming. And I think that that's super important, especially here in Camden, where youth unemployment rates are super high, and access to fruits and vegetables among youth is also very low. I think having a program that does both of those things has a large impact. We also, we do educate adults too. Adults are welcome to come and work in the gardens and learn, but our primary focus is on kids and teenagers. And then the third thing is stormwater management, which in Camden is a big problem. A lot of the streets flood, and because it's a combined sewer system, when it's flooding, it's like raw sewage that's flooding onto the streets. So any green space, a space that can absorb water instead of running it into the sewage treatment plant, is really important. And in this neighborhood, the streets used to flood a lot more than they do. And I think by having increased gardens, more trees in the neighborhood, that has impacted the flooding. And that's something that we focus a lot on. We have the native plant nursery and help start rain gardens and keep the rain gardens populated with plants. We've expanded our fruit orchard because trees absorb more water. So I think that in various ways we've been helping with that also.
What different challenges have you faced in your work at CFET?
I mean, honestly, my biggest challenge in my work at CFET has been my relationship with the board of directors, and not really, I think having a different view about what the organization should be doing and how we should be doing it, and that's been an incredible personal challenge, and I think has negatively affected CFET's ability to do well for the community. Yeah.
Okay, you touched on flooding earlier. What are the chances that more rain gardens are created across the city to help the flooding?
Oh, it's definitely happening. It's happening right now. There's a project that's supposed to end by the end of this year. Right now, there's 18 projects that are happening that should be done by the end of the year. When they're finished, that brings us to having 50 rain gardens in the city, and the idea is to keep that going.
Okay. Do you have to worry about polluted soil when considering where to grow your vegetables? Yeah,
definitely. When you're growing in urban environments, it is, extremely important. It's even an understatement. Probably, it should be mandatory that you do soil testing to make sure that you're growing in safe places. We had all of our garden sites tested this year with support from the USDA. They came and actually did free testing for us using a radar gun, which is more accurate than a traditional soil test because they can test various spots in the same garden instead of just mixing all the soil together and then sending it off for testing. So now we know exactly in the garden where there's any contamination. And so none of our sites have high contamination or contamination where we have to be concerned, but we have some elevated levels of lead, and we're working on different remediation techniques. So one thing, we grow a lot of sunflowers, and we do that to attract pollinators and because sunflowers pull heavy metals from the soil. And so we try to target the sunflowers to the areas of the garden that have sort of higher elevated levels of heavy metals, and then they pull it out.
Okay, is the community receptive to the organization's work in Camden?
Yeah, I mean, I think I've had in this neighborhood, but also throughout Camden, and I think when people hear about what we're doing, they're pretty excited about it. I think people understand that there aren't a lot of options for teenagers here, and so the fact that we have this employment program and have, an alternative to the drug economy that exists here for teens to get involved in, I think people are very appreciative of. And then access to fruits and vegetables. We have people that come to our farmers market from other neighborhoods in Camden because they appreciate, having food that's grown locally, and they want to support what we're doing.
Okay. Do you think that building supermarkets would help Camden's food accessibility issue, or is the problem just deeper than that? Would it not totally fix it?
I don't think it's that simple. ShopRite is planning to put a new location in Camden, but where they're planning to like put the store is not accessible by public transportation. It's on like a very busy road and there's no buses that go there. So I think just like plopping a supermarket in the city doesn't fix the problem. I think the problem's a lot deeper than that. One is if you're going to put a supermarket somewhere, it needs to be accessible to folks. But I think even deeper than that, it's when communities have not had access to something, they actually have to learn like what it's like to have those things. So in addition to like having the supermarket, or not having in addition to having like our farmers market, we also do cooking classes. We partner with the food bank to run these Cooking Matters classes. We provide food for their class and they provide people to teach the class. And the idea is to teach people how to use fresh produce, because when you haven't had access to fresh produce, how do you know how to use fresh produce? Why would you use it? Like, it's not the easiest thing. You have to store it differently than cans or frozen. It cooks in a different amount of time. And so it's not just access to a supermarket, but it's access to the knowledge needed to use the product. So it's more complicated, but a supermarket would be helpful.
Okay, can you explain the significance of your after-school program and why you think it's important? And do you have any plans to expand that program to other parts of the city?
Which after-school program, like the teens or
the one where
the kids?
You take the kids to work in the gardens and provide them with a job. And
so the teen program.
Yes.
Okay. Well, I think, so the teen program, we have, I guess, 4 different sessions of. So some are after school, but it also happens during the summer. And then we have a leadership track for the teens that have worked with us before, and that program runs from spring all the way through the fall. And I mean, I think that program, or both those programs, so the eco internship and the assistant farmer programs are important because A, they provide jobs for teens. B, it provides an opportunity for teens to learn skills that will help them be successful at other things. So we understand they're not all going to grow up and be farmers. That's actually not the point. But they are going to grow up and be something. And so we want to make sure that whatever it is they want to do when they grow up, that they have the skills to do that. And so we talk a lot with them about like what their dreams are for the future, and try to make sure that we're sort of encouraging the development of whatever is needed for them to do what it is that they want to do. So it's not like prescriptive, if that makes sense. So that's important. 3, just having like a safe place is really important, a place where you can just be yourself. A lot of teenagers don't have that. At school, they have to behave a certain way. At home, they might have to behave a certain way. With their friends, they might have to behave a certain way. Here, they can behave however they want, as long as it's respectful to others. That's totally okay. We don't, they don't need to be a certain personality type, or it's okay to make jokes. It's okay to talk while you're working. It's not, doing the work is not the main focus. It's like growing into a human is the main focus, if that makes sense. So yeah, what did I say? I said jobs, leadership development. Oh, and so the third thing is we encourage our youth to be more creative. So our youth are responsible for running our farmers market, and this year they also made hot sauce. And so they were, they're responsible. If they're responsible for running a business, it means they're also responsible for marketing, figuring out how you get more customers, and it makes them think outside of traditional boxes. How do you get customers for a neighborhood farmers market? Like, do you go door to door? We have like a bike with a cart. Do you ride that around for a while? Do you go to the corner with a big sign? They've tried all these things, and so constantly every week when we're like, okay, how are we gonna get more customers here? They come up with a new idea and try that. So I think that's important. And then just connection to, the outdoors. Most urban kids do not play outside, do not get dirty. If they do play outside, it's like on a basketball court or on a football field, but they're not really connected to the earth or with the seasons that much. And our work is, very much connecting with nature and seeing new things. And the teens get really obsessed with like seeing spiders and seeing grasshoppers and praying mantises. They might be freaked out by them, but they still are really like interested in them, and like, they're like looking for them in the garden. And I feel like that connection to nature is something most urban youth are totally missing. And it's really cool that these youth get to experience that.
Do you think it's important for college students like us to work with organizations like CFET?
That's a good question. I think it's important. Let's see. I think it's important for organizations like CFET to have, volunteers of various ages, because the more people that are involved in the organization, I think the more whole the organization can be. I think it's really important to have a diverse group of ideas and people to share experiences with. And so, we have a very small staff. And when you have a small staff, it means you have you don't have a diversity of ideas. You just have those people's ideas. And so I think having more volunteers allows us to be more creative and think more outside of the box. I think, students doing research for organizations like ours can be very helpful for a variety of reasons. But, sometimes there's a question of what you're doing, is it even making an impact? And we don't necessarily have the greatest tools to assess that impact. But universities and colleges and those students do have access to that. And so I think that can be really helpful for organizations to make sure that they are staying on their mission and they are making the impact that they were hoping, and that they can report that to funders. I think that part's very important.
Okay, are there any programs that you participated in the past that you think could be brought to Camden?
Can you give an example?
Anyone that you might have participated in, in Maine or?
Oh, just a similar program that could be replicated here.
Yeah.
There's so many programs that could be replicated here. Yeah, almost an endless number. I think for me, the youth development piece is what's most important and what's lacking in Camden, as far as, when people talk about crime rates and statistics about drugs. I think they're really targeting what are young people doing. And I think if there are more opportunities for young people that don't involve those things, then young people won't do those things. Because ultimately, it's about money. It's about having a job and resources for your family. So, in Philly, there's Neighborhood Bike Works. They have different programs for kids and teens, teaching them how to fix up bikes. Also, they have a racing team. I think things like that, they're sort of endless interest in. Bikes are really cool, and kids want access to their own transportation. So if there's a program that will help them build their own bike, and then now they have a bike and they can ride around and get to a job with it, I think something like that would be really awesome to have in Camden, and doesn't exist here currently. There's a lot of other models for youth employment that I think would be really helpful to have here. And different resource sharing things, having a community kitchen that multiple people can use. If it's a certified kitchen, they can make small businesses and use that space to make products. That doesn't exist in Camden, which was also for our hot sauce business really hard for us because we don't have a certified kitchen, but we had to have a certified kitchen to make this business. And so we partnered with another organization in the neighborhood, but we were able to do that because we're an organization and they're an organization. But if I was an individual wanting to start a hot sauce business and I'd gone up to them, they would have been nah, man, why did we let you use our kitchen, So just having more resources so people can start their own businesses, I think would be really helpful.
Okay, and finally, we'd like to ask, how has your work at CFET influenced, shaped, or altered your perception of the city and its residents?
Well, I didn't know a lot about Camden before I came here, so I think it completely altered my opinion because I didn't really have one. I didn't really, have knowledge before. What's cool about Camden is there are so many different neighborhoods here, and so things are very different in each neighborhood. And I think from being an outsider, you only hear generalizations about the city. You don't hear about each unique community. And so one thing that's been really cool about being here is getting those stories. And I think the residents that I've worked with, both in this neighborhood and in other neighborhoods, have been totally awesome and welcoming. There's a lot of gardens all over Camden. CFET's not the only place gardening, not the only place focusing on food access. And I do think that network of gardeners is really strong. And it's been really great to go see other people's gardens and talk with them about why they're doing what they're doing. And that's been really inspiring to me, just the amount of just individual residents that are growing food for themselves and their families and their neighbors because there's not access to it anywhere else is like phenomenal.
All right, well, thank you so much for taking the time to do this interview.
Yeah, thank you guys.